Welcome to the US AVD User Group YouTube channel. Coming up is the recording from a live online user group meeting. Please use the link below to become a member of the community and join us for our free monthly events. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get started. Okay, we'll get started. It looks like people are still joining, but welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm excited for this. So this is, well, we'll get into that in a minute. But before we get started, let's see, I think I enabled microphones, so if anybody wants to speak during this, just let me know. Otherwise, the chat should be working also. And let's see if we can get this going. This meeting is recorded. You should have got a notice. I'll stop the recording at the end for questions. So if you want to ask a question but don't want to be recorded, wait till the end and you'll have the opportunity. Let's see here. If you give me a second. I see Tony joined. Tony, you're a presenter. There you go. All right, and we'll keep moving. So the agenda. Welcome and thanks for joining again. This is the US AVD User Group. Let's see here. So the agenda is we're going to first do a status update, and then we're going to go over the Nerdio cost estimator with Tony Kai from Nerdio. And then I'm going to do a presentation on RDP Shortpath, and then some AVD updates. That's actually in the wrong order, though, I believe. So we'll do that first, and then we'll go on to questions. I just want to shout out to Sharon for starting this group a couple years ago. If my memory serves me right, I was the first one to present there, and she really that was a good group for a long time. Running these groups are difficult, but I would really appreciate that she started it. So as the update, I'm the new organizer of this group. I'm Travis Roberts. I'm a product marketing manager at Nerdio. And I'm also an author of Zero to Hero with Azure Virtual Desktop and a couple other courses on Windows 365 and hybrid identities with Azure AD and Windows AD. And by the way, if you're not seeing the screen, let me know. But I think I got a confirmation that you guys could see it. Let's see, and I do want to call out that despite the two presenters today, this isn't intended to be a Nerdio AVD user group. We'll have other options coming up in the future. It was just something that came up quickly, and Tony was able to present, so I do appreciate that. Let's see here. We do need additional. Let's see. So I want to go on to say that running these groups are not easy. It takes not a lot of time, but a significant amount of time. Most of the AVD user groups have either merged with other user groups or no longer active. I actually contributed to that. I took a consulting gig, and it kind of pulled me away from the community for a few months. And when I came back, I noticed this group hadn't hosted one for a while. So I was kind of surprised by that. So this is a reboot, and there's some things to come. First, I want to call out that let's just say that the A in AVD is, as far as this is concerned, stands for all. So the mission is going to change a little bit to include other virtual desktop technologies, Microsoft, but what I'm talking about is Windows 365 and Intune. We'll have more of a play in this because those are some important things. I think for just for managing AVD and cloud PCs in general. Let's see, the other thing I've got here is I want to include our neighbors to the north in the name. I was in Toronto last week, and they're great people, so maybe a little bit of a rebranding there to include North America. Hopefully, some of my other intentions coming up are sponsorship opportunities. One of the interesting things about forming a user group is you can either do it as it's all free, but if you want to collect money from sponsors so you can do bigger things, then that requires a legal entity because there's tax implications in that. So I'm going to look into that. as well. But the one thing that I got to point out is that I can't do alone. So this group will need organizers to come coming up. So if you're interested at all, let me know. It's a few hours a month, just managing sponsors and speakers and maybe hosting on occasion. Let's see here. I have, and to keep this going, I do have a certain set of expectations around attendance and how many people join. I was hoping for 10 at least in this one, and I see we've got 13, so that's great. That's exceeding my expectations for the short time that this was announced and the the small number of people who actually joined the group. That's pretty good. So I'm excited about that. Oh, and it's August. August is typically pretty low turnout for user groups. Okay, so there's a couple things, just expectations. Treat everyone with respect. I think that goes without saying, but this is a community group, so we're all here to support each other. Become involved in the meetings in the community. Make an extra effort to attend. That's one of the things. Drop-off rate is 50% for user groups on average, and that's what I'm seeing here today on the people who signed up and joined. But I do know that it's sometimes difficult. I've signed up for more than one user group and wasn't able to make it. So, but just try your best. Share the group with peers. That's the big thing. Is when you see these messages come across, let other people know. The more, the merrier, and the better result we'll get. And let's see here. And if you want to stand out, share your knowledge with the group. Become a speaker. This is a user group, so it's supported by and ran by users. Odds are if you use AVD or Windows 365 or Intune, you have some interesting stories to share. I'm also on the board for the MN Minnesota Azure user group, and I've said that line many, many times, and I've never got a response. So, but it is. That's how I became involved with groups, and it's been a good thing. And I'm seeing Tony light up. Maybe my speaker's not working. My microphone.
No, you're good. I hear you.
Give me a second. Let me switch my settings.
Yeah, you're fine, Travis.
Yeah,
I can hear you. Well, maybe you can't hear us well. I guess that's what it is.
We haven't said anything.
Yeah. Is either ignoring? Yeah.
Tony?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, awesome.
Let me just find the volume. Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you just fine. Yep.
It's weird. I don't know where the volume's coming from. But okay, we'll keep moving. Okay, so let's move on to some AVD updates. Autoscale for personal host pools is now in public preview. So that's an option that is now available to autoscale, shut down idle and disconnected sessions and either start at by time or start on connect. And I'm not going back months with this. I just got a couple here. The other one is general availability for watermarking support for AVD. So this is a way of protecting sensitive data. The way it works is the QR code that's presented on the screen is the connection ID for the remote session. So if something is leaked, you can trace back where that came from. It's part of AVD screen protection, and the only clients that support this feature can connect to the remote session, and it's supported by the remote desktop client and the web client. It is enabled on the session host. So, all right, Tony, we're on for the sponsor section. Are you ready to present?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Let me
Officially
stop.
say I'm the first presenter for the reboot AVD or North America user group.
And I think I made you a presenter.
Yeah, can you hear me?
There you go.
Can you hear me?
I can, Tony.
Okay. I guess I'll jump in. Yeah, so my name is Tony Kai. I've been active in the AVD community since you know the virtual desktop or WVD came out. So it was in 2019. I joined Nerdio about 2 years prior to that. So I was involved in sort of the beta testing, when it was RDMI and it was called Cowbell internally inside of Microsoft. So I've been around this particular virtual desktop technology since the very beginning. And me working at Nerdio, I in the capacity of being a sales engineer, a lot of the things I get to have the fun and task to be doing every single day is really helping our customers figure out what the potential cost of their AVD environments could be, right? So if you're not familiar with Nerdio, we're a orchestration tool that exists for native AVD, and we actually have two products in our portfolio. We have a product for MSPs, which is kind of what you're seeing on my screen, and we also have a product for enterprise, which is what you see on this screen. Now, we have a tool. We call it sort of the pre-sales tool, and a lot of times, and this tool is free, by the way. Anybody can use this, whether you're using Nerdio or not. But it was really designed to help give a end customer or a managed service provider who's reselling Azure Virtual Desktop Services to their end customer a really good idea of what the environment is going to cost based on how it's spec'd out. So Travis asked me to give a quick demo. I'm hopefully not going to take more than 20 minutes showing all this, but I'll kind of maybe do this twice really quickly. So pretend you guys maybe work at a system integrator like a Presidio or somebody like that, and you have an end customer that is coming to you and say, hey, I need, I'm looking for virtual desktop services. I need to know how much my my expected Azure costs is, right? So that's the problem we're looking to solve today, is figuring out the exact cost down to the a dollar hopefully of a Azure environment. So if you've never seen this before, this is really cool. If you're already in Azure and you have additional workloads to spin up, is also a useful tool to help you really accurately guesstimate the cost of deployment. So this is the Nerdio Manager for MSP tool. Now, an MSP is typically tasked with deploying an entire environment. So you can kind of see here, we can actually create quotes and save them. So very similar to the Azure Cost Estimator, but you'll see in a second that it's also very different. So, the Azure Cost Estimator, the Azure Calculator, I love this tool. And most people who are very familiar with Azure love this tool. But for somebody who's new doing this, it could be very daunting, right? If you click on Azure Virtual Machines, there could be hundreds of different items in the drop down here as to which VM you can kind of pick. And even if you kind of look for, like, let's say, for example, a 2-core 8 gig machine, you'll notice probably 40 different SKUs of a 2-core 8 gig machine, right? And each individual machine is very different, obviously. Otherwise, Microsoft wouldn't have created them as individual SKUs. But a lot of people new to Azure aren't familiar with the properties or attributes of a VM SKU. So that's one thing, right? And the other thing is, when you're not familiar with Azure, when people think about virtual machines, they think about virtual machines. They may think about the disks, but there's other things like IOPS and bandwidth and storage and all that people tend to miss when they're, quoting out something for their client. So this tool basically is a wizard-driven tool where we kind of reverse engineer how the Azure Cost Estimator works, right? Because we're creating this cost estimator for a very specific workload for virtual desktops. You can see us asking you very specific, poignant questions about your environment. And as long as you answer these questions correctly, we'll actually spit out a accurate cost for you. So if you kind of see me scroll down this list, you'll pay attention to this little box I have in the left-hand side. It's going to tell me in real time as I select these values what my current cost is for the set environment. So again, pretend you're a managed service provider or a system integrator. You have a client who's asking you the cost of a full entire solution inside of Azure, right? So the first question it's going to ask is, I'll just kind of walk you through this calculator really quickly, and you'll kind of get the idea of what this tool does. Again, it's free to use. Anybody can use it. So let's say you have a, 300 user environment using Azure Virtual Desktops. The next question we ask you is, out of the 300 users, how many people need dedicated, personal desktops or cloud PCs. Let's just say, for example, we have 50 of them. Anybody use GPU dedicated desktops or dedicated pool desktops? We'll say no for now. And then right here it says we're just going to assume that the rest of them are just pool desktop users, right? So out of 300 total users, you have 50, dedicated desktop users, and the rest of them are pooled. So then now you get these two options. You can kind of say, hey, for these environments, some of these 50 users, maybe 25 of them, I actually want them as cloud PC, right? So I can pick the enterprise SKU for cloud PC. Maybe I want the 2-core 8 gig of RAM machines for cloud PC, and maybe the other 25 I actually want 4-core 16 gig of RAM machines. Again, enterprise SKU, 4-core 16. And as I'm going down this list, you'll see this. I guess these numbers start populating. Right, so for the 250 users, maybe I'll split them across 2 host pools, 150 on one, and maybe 100 on the second one, right? And maybe for VM sizing, we're going to use E8 SV5. This is one of my favorite SKUs. It's got enough CPU and RAM for bursting, and it's not too big, not too small. All right, prevents you from putting too many eggs in one basket, as I like to say. Here's where we can actually select the disk that the C drive runs, and I'm going to use the premium SSD here. And we actually have this really interesting feature because Nerdio Autoscale can allow you to flip disks from running to stop state. We can actually make it so when the machine is running, we can make the C drive run at the fastest premium disk capability speeds. But when we scale in or shut the machine down at night when nobody's using it, we can actually dynamically flip this disk to a standard spinning disk. So at rest, you pay less for it, right? So we're going to do that across both host pools. This is an area where I don't really cheap out in. Sure, you can get away with the standard SSD, but hey, you know what? Pay the $8 more and then get the premium, and you never have end users complain. All right, so I'll say these guys are 50-hour work week customers. We're going to keep one of them on at all times. Let Nerdio scale this up to 7 machines for this particular host pool, and then we have a second host pool. Same thing. We're going to use E8 SV5s. And again, do the thing with the disk clipping, as well as make this, about a 50-hour work week end customer. So you figure all this stuff out. We're basically deciding that for the first host pool, we'll need no more than 7 8-core 64 gigs if the user to core ratio is 2 for 100 users, and for 150 users, we'll need no more than 10 machines. Right, so pretty easy to kind of go through this and figure out your host pool sizing. Now, as a full managed MSP, managing the virtual desktops is not the only thing that they'll have to actually calculate the cost for, right? You'll still need to, accommodate for the rest of the IT stack. So for a smaller or medium-sized business, there's probably multiple domain controllers. I use a B2MS for that. CO2 maybe. You got some app servers, some file servers, but you get the idea here. Is that we're just kind of building out the rest of their stack, right? You got some data disks. Maybe you got multiple data disks. Let's put a terabyte disk in here. 12, something like that. Got a SQL server. I'm going to use E-series machines. I'm going to do an E8 DSV5 with a temp disk, and this SQL server, let's say, has the same amount of disks. And so the idea is you fill out the rest of this calculator, figure out the VMs you need, and Nerdio is kind of doing the math on the fly. Okay. So once I finish figuring out my servers, I come down here for licensing. So licensing, obviously super important. For SMB customer, their go-to SKU is likely an M365 Business Premium or an E3. So you can select what licensing the customer needs from this aspect. Now, Nerdio doesn't actually sell any Azure or 365 licenses. Typically, if you're an MSP, you go to a distributor, a tier 2 CSP distributor for that stuff. But here, you're just figuring out what licenses you need, right? So we'll do 8 cores of SQL I put in here. SQL standard 8 cores. I'm going to do a 3-year upfront payment for that from the CSP software subscription program. Come down here. You decide whether you want to take advantage of Azure hybrid benefits or not. So we're going to say yes, I want to take advantage of that. We're going to do a 3-year reservation to get a discount. We're going to do backups, right? You can specify the retention. Let's do 6 weeks, 12 months, 30 days. VPN wise, we'll do a gateway 1 maybe. Right, if you want to use AADDS instead of a VM domain controller, you can do that. You can specify the SKU, as well as any additional Azure file storage other than FSLogix. Right, so let's say you have a standard share with 2 terabytes of data. So you can kind of specify that as well. And then section 5, we come down to other cost assumptions. Right, so a user profile is likely somewhere 20 gigs large per person. So we're going to calculate 20 gigs for 300 people on average. Bandwidth consumption is going to be probably about $2 per person on average is what we see. Storage operations for the disks that aren't premium, it's going to be 0.3 cents per gig. Any log analytics workspace data captured, for a 300 user environment that might run you like, let's say $200, right? So that could be maybe 150 gigs consumed over 30 days, perhaps, right? So we're calculating the entire total cost of ownership for this said Azure environment, right? And so because you're an MSP, you may want to go through and specify, what CSP discounts you get from the distributor. You have any, you kind of enter them through here. And of course, an MSP is going to want to resell this to a customer, and here's the opportunity to kind of tack in some margin. But if I leave this at 0, I can click on view cost, and it's going to give me an entire breakdown of the entire infrastructure, broken down by Azure, M365 licensing, Windows 365 licensing, Nerdio consumption, right? We have different partner tiers. At 300 seats, you're probably looking at a gold or platinum at that point, and you kind of control the cost of that. And so this is your total monthly cost for an environment that looks just like this, managed by Nerdio. And here's the upfront licensing cost with SQL Server and Windows Server licenses to have you take advantage of Azure Hybrid Benefit. So yeah, here's your quote. This is something that your engineers can start following when you're building it out. And here's how we got to that $6,788 with all the components of Azure broken down by its different categories. Right, so that's the cost estimator for the Nerdio Managed for MSP product. Now I see some people here on the call are actually Nerdio customers already. Some of them using the enterprise product. And if you're using the enterprise product, we have a similar tool, except it doesn't allow you to calculate the entire stack because you likely already have ways to kind of do that, or you may already have workloads in Azure. But on the Nerdio Managed for Enterprise product, we call that the Nerdio Modeler, or the advisor. So under the advisor tab, there's something called a modeler. And this is just very similar to what I showed you, but it's wizard driven, and it focuses consumption only on the AVD stuff, not the entire IT stack. So here I'm going to load up a new model. And the model is let's say you're bringing on some contract workers in India, and you want to model out what 300 developers look like, right? Before you actually press go. So what we're doing here is loading the modeler, and then we're gonna basically go through it very similar to what I showed you before, and it's gonna spit out a cost. Yeah, here you go. So let's say India developers. Right, and then I hit next. It's gonna ask me my host name. I'll say yeah, desktops, whatever. I'll do multi-session. I'll do 300 people in this host pool. We'll put this in via central. Right. It's gonna have to pull up the cost again. Hit next. Let's say they're heavy or medium workload users. Maximum amount of users per CPU 2. I use the E8 SV5 again. It's my favorite SKU. Surprised. Yeah, I'm forced to use. Why is that? Some resource rules preventing me from picking that size. So a resource rule is another Nerdio feature that lets you specify what you see in those dropdowns, right? Because a lot of times when you hit the dropdown to select the VM size, there are maybe VMs that the IT manager doesn't want their people selecting to begin with, so they may limit this list to what's approved by IT to be used. So I'll actually use a AMD variant of a D16 for now. Do a C drive that's 128. Stop this type spinning disk again. Hit next. We're going to use a marketplace image or a customized image. Right? A customized image runs a 2-core 8 gig of RAM machine, and I'm spending maybe about 6 hours per month patching that machine. So I have to account for that the time that custom image is on for. Hit next. Let's say Monday through Friday, 9 to 6. The percentage of employees that don't show up on average for maybe 10%. Right, and then hit next, and user profile average maybe 20 gigs per person. And that's it. That's all you need, and it spits out this model. Shows you everything down to the per user cost, optimize, how much money we're saving you, disk, compute, FS logics, and I can hit save, and it saves my model. Right, and I can see sort of advanced details of how this stuff is broken down by the numbers. And very soon, future releases, you can actually click the button, and this whole entire model actually gets deployed inside your environment in real time. So yeah, that's what I wanted to show you today. Again, we have 2 products in our portfolio. They manage costs and predict costs in different ways based on the different use cases. But yeah, any questions, guys? And both tools are free to use. If you go to getnerdio.com, those tools are actually on the top right corner. If you're an MSP, you would use this tool. If you're an enterprise, you would use this tool. Again, it doesn't, let you kind of use it pretty much immediately. Yeah, I guess.
And I enabled microphones, so if you want to come off mute and ask a question or through the chat. It's a very comprehensive solution. The thing I like about it is, as you go through the exercise, that you may be faced with choices that you have to make. What's that?
Yeah. That makes you think, right? It's something maybe you haven't thought about before, right?
Yeah,
like,
because
I didn't think
it's
that.
better to do it at that stage than during deployment.
Yeah, because when you're paying money, a lot of times it's like, oh man, I'm bleeding money. Where am I bleeding money? Where is the cost come from?
Yeah. Well, if there's no other questions, I'll give it a second here. Yeah. Otherwise, thanks for presenting. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll hang out for the rest of the call.
All right. So next up is me. Let's see here. So next up, I'm going to talk to you about RDP Shortpath for managed and public networks. So this is going to be a pretty technical networking discussion, but don't worry, I'll provide context along the way, and if you have questions, go ahead and ask. But the first thing, let me see here. There we go. The first thing we're going to talk about is round trip time. So because before we understand what Shortpath is, we should look at, the problem we're trying to solve. A round trip time measures the connection performance of an RDP session. It's the time between, this the example I'm going to use. It's the time between typing a character on your keyboard and it's showing up on the screen. So if you think about how that works, the client is at their remote session. They hit T in this example. That T has to travel over the wire to the session host and then back to the client to display on the screen. So that is round trip time. And it's a key indicator for performance. And I'm going to hop over. I just want to show, let's see here. Got a lot of windows open, so bear with me. This is the Azure Virtual Desktop Experience Estimator. If you're not familiar with it, it's a great tool that shows from where I'm sitting right here, the round trip time for North Central US is 40 milliseconds. Central US is 47, and so on. So if I'm deploying a resource, I probably don't want to deploy it to South Africa North or Australia Southeast. That's pretty high. There we go. Well, we already did that. So the factors that affect round trip time, the most significant is distance between the session host and the user. Also, internet connection quality will have a factor. If you've got a bad internet connection, that's going to cause some issues. Firewall and network performance. If you've got a firewall that's just flooded and can't keep up, that's going to affect round trip time. And client and session host resources. So a lot of the TCP connection or TCP IP connection is offloading onto RAM and memory within the system. And if that's becoming a bottleneck, that will affect round trip time. Microsoft says that for Azure Virtual Desktop, latency up to 150 milliseconds shouldn't impact the user's experience. I've been in IT and consulting for a long time, and I love the qualification there of shouldn't. Latency up to 200 milliseconds should be fine for text, but not video. Anything above 200 is going to impact experience. I would try to aim for lower than those numbers, but that's Microsoft's documentation. So I said the most significant factor is the distance. And so why did I say that? Well, light can only travel so fast. we can help internet connection, firewall network performance, and client and session host resources, but we really can't fix distance. So that's one of the main things to keep in mind. Okay. So Shortpath goal. First, one of the goals of Shortpath is to use UDP for the RDP connection. And we'll get into this a little bit deeper, but the default protocol for an RDP connection is TCP. And here you can see how that works. So we've got a client and we've got a session host, and that connection is going over the internet. But the question becomes, what if we have a blazing fast internet connection, private internet connection between the two? We can improve round trip time by routing traffic over that path. Okay, I said this was going to be technical. TCP and UDP. It's not going to be too technical though. So let's talk about TCP first. TCP, that's the default for RDP. It's connection based. It's reliable and has built-in error checking and data sequencing. So that's good. It's good if you're like processing orders or credit card transactions. But with AVD and the RDP protocol, it can be kind of slow. So I've got a very overly simplified example of TCP. So the server passes a segment of data to the client. The client acknowledges that it got that first segment, and then the server passes back the second segment, and then the client says it got it, and that goes on and on. It's very reliable, but it's also slow. It's chatty. All data is delivered in order, but again, there's a performance penalty for that. So UDP, on the other hand, is connectionless. Error checking is left up to the application. So there's no real fixed order. It's kind of best effort delivery. Because it skips the error checking and sequencing, it's faster. So here I've got another overly simplified example. The client requests data and the server just starts sending it. If there's a problem in the network, some packets get dropped, it just keeps sending. It's up to the client to request that data or fix it. So why then would UDP be better than TCP for an RDP session? It's because real-time communication like video, audio, don't really benefit from the connection reliability of TCP. It's more important to have low latency, again, the round trip time, than it is to have a guarantee of data sequencing. Think of a VoIP, a voice over IP call or a Teams call. If it drops a packet, you're going to hear a little glitch, maybe an echo or something, but the call keeps going, and most people are just okay with that. It would be better than a long echo and delays in the communication because packets have to be resent. Okay, so before we go on again, we have to understand what's called the reverse connection transport. This is how the default initial connection for all AVD sessions take place. So we're going to go over the steps. First, the session host on the Azure VNet will connect to the RD broker. AVD broker, I've seen it both ways. I stuck with RD here, but I'll probably call it an AVD broker gateway coming up. So when the client starts, when the session host starts, the agent sends a message to the broker saying, I'm here. And that's where that registration token comes in, because that's what's used to authenticate it. Next, the client logs into Azure AD. So this is the client is trying to initiate that session. It reaches out to Azure AD for authentication. And then the client, once it's authenticated, it reaches out to the RD web and grabs a subscription. It gets a subscription feed, so all of the resources, a list of the resources it has access to, or the client has access to. Once that once a client has that and they initiate a session to a remote desktop, the client establishes a TLS 1.2 connection to the closest AVD gateway. So now it's hitting the RD gateway. Then the request is bounced off from the RD broker, where it says, hey, this client wants to access a session host, and the broker says, oh yeah, there's one right here. And that connection, the session host establishes a TLS 1.2 connection to the RD gateway. And then once those are established, the client and the session host start talking to each other over that loop. So that is the reverse connect transport. Yeah. So the entire process uses TCP, the slower protocol. It's the basic connectivity for AVD. This is what it'll always fall back to if there's a problem with anything we're going to talk about. TLS uses TCP. It requires outbound port 443, and it's not really optimized for real-time traffic. Okay, so with that in mind, that's the basic. Let's talk now. We're finally on to RDP Shortpath for managed networks. And managed networks means there's a connection between where the client's sitting and the session host, a direct connection, and that's going to be either VPN or ExpressRoute. So we're going to go back to this diagram because, again, those step 1 through 7 that we already went over, that always happens first. But in this case, we have an ExpressRoute or a VPN connection connecting the private client network and the Azure VNet. So after the connection, the client and session host exchange capabilities, and the session host passes its private IP address to the client. Once a client has that, it establishes a parallel UDP connection directly over that direct connection. So now they're talking, and this is parallel, so there's no interruption to the session. Once that's established, the connection, the legacy one or the one through the RD gateway, that one's dropped, and this connection is used, so that private connection. So that's what RDP Shortpath for managed networks does. It leverages, it establishes a UDP connection directly over that private network. It does not replace reverse connection transport, it enhances it. And that's an important thing because that initial connection, steps 1 through 7, always take place first. It's based on a universal rate control protocol, or URCP, and that learns network parameters and enhances UDP with some active monitoring and network connections. If you remember when I was talking about TCP, I said it, or UDP, I compared to TCP, it doesn't have a lot of the error checking. URCP adds some of that in there. It lowers the round trip time, first by using UDP instead of TCP, and second by removing that gateway relay point. This model will support QoS. So if QoS is important, you can initiate it through this because you're dealing with a private network. So if your private network's configured to honor QoS tagging on a network, that will honor it. And also the connection, although it's using UDP, it's the same TLS 1.2 that that the original RDP connection uses. So there's no change, no lower security from that standpoint. Okay, so there's some requirements to get this to work, though. This does not happen out of the box. The session host and the client require a configuration setting. The remote desktop client has to be smart to be able to exchange those capabilities, and that is the RDP client for Windows version 1.2.3488 or newer. Windows only. And again, we're talking about a private network, so there has to be a line of sight between the networks, either ExpressRoute or site-to-site or point-to-site, and it has to use UDP. So one of the things that Microsoft points out is some VPN connections, either point-to-site or site-to-site, will encapsulate traffic in TCP. So if you're taking a UDP packet and then stuffing it into a TCP packet, you're losing some of those efficiencies. You still gain the removal of that RD gateway relay, but you're adding another level of encapsulation on there. And again, that's some VPN connections leverage TCP, and you want to avoid that. And yeah, and then there has to be a line. I feel like I went back one. Yeah. And UDP port 3390 has to be open. Actually, that's the default. You can change that port if needed. Let's see here, on the client configuration, and I'll take a look at this in a second. We'll log in and see that. On the server, we have to enable RDP Shortpath for managed networks. And there's a template. If you log into this, or if you're trying to configure this, there's an actual AVD group policy template that you have to apply. This setting, enable RDP Shortpath for managed networks, might not be on there with the older template. Okay. Let me see. We're gonna take a look at how this works. So here I have a server, and first I want to point out this UDP turn off UDP on client is set to enable. I love group policy double negatives. So turn off UDP on client, that means we've enabled it, so UDP is disabled. And I did that on purpose so we could see the connection state. So if I connect, and we're not going to go too far into the login. If I click on the little lines here and see the details, right here it says the connection quality is good. Under transport protocol, we have WebSocket. That is the reverse connection transport TCP-based connection. That we've got that because I disabled UDP on this client. Let's log off. Go in here and set this to not configured and try to log in again. Hopefully that session was done. Okay, so we've enabled UDP now. And now the connection is good and UDP is enabled. And down here under transport protocol, it says UDP private network. So we're using the short path for private network. Interestingly enough, round trip time, I think, increased. So this client is in AVD along with the session host. So it's not the best real world example, because they're both on both the client and the server on the Microsoft network. Okay. So that was RDP Shortpath for managed networks. Any questions so far?
I had a question.
Yeah.
So this, RDP Shortpath has been sort of in public preview for a long time. It's been in GA for maybe almost a year now, right? But like all of a sudden, like this whole stun and turn stuff came out, and like I really tried following it, and that those two new protocols like really confused the crap out of me.
Yeah.
Like I know one of them is in public preview still, but what do you guys know about that?
You know what? If you give me a couple minutes, that's next up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Jumped the gun there.
No problem.
Steve had a question too.
Steve?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Hey, so I watched your YouTube video on this. Very, very enlightening. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
So my question is, I use Azure Virtual Desktops as my main computer from home. When I go into the office, we've got an express route into Azure. If I turn on RDP Shortpath on the desktop that I use, will I still be able to use it from home? Is it going to still go through steps 1 through 7, or?
Yep, it always starts with 1 through 7, and that's a fallback if nothing
Okay.
else works. If you have RDP Shortpath for private networks enabled, it will use that. That's going to be the first choice. And then what we're going to talk about next is RDP Shortpath over public networks, and that will be the next option available. So from home with no VPN connection, it may use RDP Shortpath for public networks, direct connection it's called.
Okay,
So
cool.
we'll go over
Thanks.
that, but I'm looking at the notes here. Dave asked if Shortpath will allow to move medical dentist to AVD. Maybe. I do know that medical dental have a lot of huge files, and we still have the bandwidth issue with that. And then using both RDP Shortpath or managed and public networks, you can have it enabled on both host pools, or you can have both enabled on a host pool. It's just going to try the managed network first, and then it will try the public network next. Tony, did you have a question?
Yeah, I noticed this, but I wasn't 100% sure. Right, obviously, I work with a lot of AVD customers. When you enable UDP, the things that require redirection over TCP, I believe they stop working. Those RDP virtual channels over TCP. Do you think that's true, or it's just a coincidence maybe?
I haven't seen that, but yeah, if that connection goes to UDP and it requires TCP, that I could see where there might be a problem with that.
So I don't know if anybody else had noticed that at all, but then when you turn it off, then it works, right? So it's like.
I have seen. I wasn't able to dig into the reason behind it, but I have seen people get the black screen, and then they disable UDP, and it goes away. So I'm not sure. What I didn't have the time or the opportunity to dig into that issue, but I have heard of that becoming a problem. Okay, let's go on to, we're going to go on to the next item here, if I can find my mouse. Okay, so now is RDP Shortpath for public networks direct connection. So before we talk about that, though, we have to talk about STUN, or Simple Transversal Underneath NAT. It's used to identify a public NAT IP address devices for devices passing. I'm sorry, it's used to identify the public NAT IP address for devices passing through a NAT device for access to the internet. I need to reword that. Let's see here. So let's take a look at what the problem is. I like to do it this way. Here I am on a computer, and if I go to command prompt, now this computer, I'm going to go IP config. So this is the IP configuration. What is its public IP address? The computer has no idea. That's handled by another system. It's NATed. But if we go to one of my favorite websites, ipchicken.com, ipchicken tells us that this computer's public IP address is 20.169.168.231. So what STUN does, in essence, is it's ipchicken for Shortpath. So when to use STUN, the first thing that happens is both the client and the server reach out to the STUN server. That IP address, this private IP address, is translated, and I'm going to call out that the port, so 52,000 here, it comes back. Let's see, it goes out. The stun server sends a reply saying your public IP address and port is 20.5.5.5 with port 52,000. And that's the same for the server. So what this is doing is it's giving back these two devices that are on a private network its public IP address. And I'm calling out the port because some NAT devices change the port to a new number. This is typically with any firewall or NAT device that is a high availability configuration, and that's called symmetric NAT. Symmetric NAT is not supported with this solution, and that's where turn comes in, and we'll talk about that soon. But so one of the key parts here is the port has to translate to the same on the internal private IP and the public IP. Okay. So here we have 1 through 7 again. Again, that initial connection always the same way. And then the client and the session host reach out to the stun server. The stun server is going to pass back all of its public IP addresses and ports. Once that happens, a candidate list of public IP address and ports are passed between the client and the session host. So now they know what the public IP address is for the other side of the connection. And then they will simultaneously try to initiate a connection to the other's ports and IP address. And if one's connected, the session is then moved to that connection. So now we're able to do a direct UDP connection over the internet, over those, because those servers, the client and server was able to identify its public IP address and port. So that's what stun does. Stun uses the universal rate control protocol, again, to enhance that connection. And let's see. So it's using UDP and removing the relay to get that the best network performance without a private network. Yep. So the requirement, the first one is there's no real requirements. This will work if the networking supports it, meaning symmetric NATing isn't enabled, it just works. So a lot of times you'll look at the connection and it's just working. It requires the same remote desktop client. It also it requires UDP. UDP has to be enabled, of course, for it to use UDP. And port 3478 has to be open. That's the stun server port. And again, does not support symmetric NAT. And here's the boo. Azure Firewall and Azure NAT Gateway both use symmetric NATing. Also, it's recommended to enable Teredo to add extra NAT transversal candidates to increase the chances of a successful connection. Okay, let's take a look at how that works. Okay, the first thing I have to do, so I have two session hosts, just what's going on behind the scenes here. This one that has drain mode enabled is not configured for the private network. So I have to turn off drain mode. I'm just forcing a connection to a specific server or session host. One of them is configured for the private network, the other one isn't. And in production, of course, they should be the same. Now when I connect, it's going to go, the session host I'm connecting to now does not have the private connection enabled. If I look at my connection status, it says UDP is enabled, and it just says protocol is UDP. So that's good. That means it's now using the RDP Shortpath for public networks direct connection. Okay. I'm going to just show one other tool. Speaking of black screens, I'm doing a bit of a dangerous thing. I'm running two labs off the same account that I'm connecting with. So there's some MDM policies that are applying that are not related at all to this. But there's a tool that I just want to point out called AVD Net Test. This is one of the tools we can use to test connectivity. And here it says turn support. I'm showing this because it's going to be relevant in our next session or next topic. But I just wanted to call out this one tool, AVD Net Test. It's a way to test your turn support, which we'll talk about next. There we go. And here's pictures of what we just saw in case my demo didn't work. Okay, so now we're going to talk about RDP Shortpath for public networks indirect connection. And we need to talk about transversal using relays around NAT or turn. So this is the third the third option we have. It assists with NAT, with transversal of NAT or firewall devices in real-time traffic. So it acts as a UDP relay is basically what it does. And if you remember back, well, in the next image, we'll see there's a RD gateway that everything was connected to. A turn server does the same thing, only it's UDP. So here, the client and the server, because it may be using that symmetric natting, which doesn't support stun, here we can use this turn server to bridge the connection over the internet, bridge the UDP connection over the internet. So let's see how that works. Again, 1 through 7. The direct connection fell. So it tries that direct connection default, always on by, it will work if it's supported, but that fails. The next thing it does is it goes out to the turn server and establishes a connection through there. And if that works, and that's in parallel to the existing session, if that works, the session is moved over the turn relay. So it's that simple. And again, it uses the universal rate control protocol to enhance the connection, and using UDP to enhance performance, but we still have a relay. Here again, just like the last one, there's no client or session host configuration required, but there are some gotchas on this. We need that same Windows client version, and it's Windows only. UDP has to be enabled. I don't know of a lot of people who disable UDP at the firewall, but it does need to be enabled. It is in public preview, and there's limited turn servers available. And it's only available on validation host pools while in public preview. Although I did hear recently that some people said they were able to use the turn server on a non-validation host pool briefly. So maybe Microsoft's testing some stuff, but right now the host pool has to be a validation host pool for it to work. These are the regions where it's available. So I had an issue with getting this solution to work. So I'm going to show images, and I just realized that I might have deployed to central US, so that's fun. Anyway, so when you go in, when you establish a connection, you look at the connection status. It will say UDP is enabled, and here the word relay is what indicates that it's using turn. And like I said, I don't have a demo for that. That's where that AVD net test also comes into play if you're testing that. So in summary, RDP Shortpath for managed networks requires network connectivity between the client and the session host. A private network connection must be configured on the client and the session host. So there are client and session host configurations required to get that to work. And it supports QoS. That's the only Shortpath solution that supports QoS. RDP Shortpath for public networks direct connection that uses stun. It's on by default, and it's not supported with symmetric NAT. And Shortpath for public networks indirect connection that uses the UDP turn relay. It's in private preview, and it's limited region availability. So thank you. I'll open it up to questions. And in a second, I'll stop the recording and we'll open it up for questions.